Hello, I am Kishore Patwardhan and I work for Banaras Hindu University in the Department of Kriyasharya as a professor. And today I'll be discussing the testing, the relevance of the basic theories of Ayurveda. And in today's talk, I'll be taking up Tridosha as an example. Before I start my talk, uh, I would like to share this rather unusual disclaimer, right? This talk of mine, it overrides all my previous talks on this subject, and this is something rather unusual disclaimer, but yes, it has to be there because this is the first public talk I'm giving after I wrote my paper Confessions of an Ayurvedic Professor, where I have retracted most of my past views expressed in my previous writings in the subject. So it was published last year in the month of July in the journal IJME, Indian Journal of Medical Ethics, and hence any mismatch between this talk and my previous talks must be viewed from this perspective. And this is the fundamental disclaimer that I would like to share at the beginning of my talk. Right? So, what am I going to talk about in this lecture? I'll be covering four major topics or sub themes rather. So I'll be trying uh, to reconstruct the Tridosha theory. So there will be an attempt at reconstructing the Tridosha theory. I'll be taking up the question as to what is the value of Tridosha theory in today's clinical practice. Third topic that I'll be covering is what portion of this theory is obsolete and needs to be discarded. And fourth point will be some general comments on the current system of education. So this is how I'll be talking, and I have arranged the different themes under this topic. So let me start with the origins of Tridosha theory. So Tridosha theory has its roots in Nyaya Vaisheshika schools of philosophy. And Nyaya is primarily commonsensical logic, and Vaisheshika is primitive physics, to put it in simple terms. And our Tridosha theory can be easily traced back to these two schools of philosophy. Before starting the discussion on Tridosha theory, some understanding of PANCHA is essential, because all these different concepts like Tridosha, PANCHA, GUNA, all these are interrelated and integrated. That is how our ancient Indian knowledge systems, they were always linking the different concepts with each other. So PANCHA, that is the primary units, 5 primary units. That is how we will call it, right? They make up the entire observable universe according to these schools of thoughts. That is Nyaya and Vaisheshika. The 5 primary units are Akasha, Vayu, Agni, Up, and Prithvi. Again, the translation of these terms could be sometimes confusing or sometimes ambiguous, right? So Akasha is often translated as space, but we should not take this space for outer space or some sky or something like that. No, space is, I'm sitting here and in front of me you are sitting, suppose, and there is space between us. That is space. So space is simply, it is a term that denotes a continuous area or expanse which is free, available, or unoccupied. That is the simplest meaning of Akasha, right? Vayu is wind, Agni is fire, Up is water, and Prithvi is earth. There is no much confusion, but Akasha is often translated in many different terminologies. Some people they use ether, some use it as sky or something like that, and that creates some confusion. So let us be very very uh, 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 clear about this, right? Akasha is simply space, right? And interpretation of or translation of these 5 primary units as proto elements or elements or atoms sometimes, or atomic structure, or maybe subatomic particles, all this is problematic and it could be misleading, right? It is to be simply understood that they are the 5 primary units, right? The entire universe is made up of these 5 primary units. This is how our ancient scholars perceived this universe. So this concept is common sense based. It should not be confused for highly evolved physics or chemistry. It is not highly evolved physics or chemistry, but it is simply common sense based, right? So according to this theory, the entire observable universe was classified into 5 classes, and this classification is based on 5 different sensory organs that we have. So we are equipped with 5 sensory organs, and hence we can perceive only 5 different sensations, roughly, of course, right? So things that can be heard comprised of one class, right? So observable universe was classified into 5 classes. So one of them was things that can be heard, that is shabda; things that can be touched, sparsha; things that can be seen, rupa; things that can be tasted, rasa; things that can be smelled, gandha. Okay, now these 5 classes were integrated into 5 mahabhutas. Again, there was integration, right? So akasha was integrated with shabda, because sound can travel even in space. When I speak, you can hear me, because sound is traveling, right, in this space. So vayu is wind, and it is integrated with sparsha, because vayu is breeze, right? And breeze can be felt only and only through touch. There are no other sensory organs with which you can feel or perceive the wind. Similarly, agni, the fire, or light sometimes, right? So rupa, it is integrated with rupa, because things can be viewed only when there is light. So in the absence of light, you cannot view the things. And up is water. It was integrated with rasa, because substances dissolved in water can only be tasted, right? Without dissolving in water, you cannot taste something. Right? And prithvi was integrated with gandha, because when it rains, the soil smells good. This is very simple logic. And this is, soil smelling good. This has got a transcultural connotation, right? In English, it is called fragrance of soil. In Hindi, we call it mitti ki khushbu. In Kannada, we call it mannina vasane, right? And even in Tamil, mannvasam. So all these are, having a cultural, transcultural connotation, right? So fragrance is always associated with soil and not with flowers or something else. This is, there is some, interesting phenomenon that is transcultural, right? So what we speak can be heard by another. This is what I was talking about, akasha and shabda. There could be some confusion, right? What we speak can be heard by another, because our voice travels through space. And ancient scholars possibly did not realize that sound needed some medium to travel. For example, air in this example, right? When I speak, the person sitting before me can hear my voice, because there is air in between, right? There is space, and this space is filled up by air. So in the absence of air, sound cannot travel, because sound cannot travel in vacuum. But possibly our ancient scholars, they did not think that much, right? So because it was commonsensical and based on everyday, day-to-day experiences, all this was classified and documented. So space can only transmit sound, but can't be felt through other senses. This space, right, can only transmit sound and can't be felt through other senses. That is why the akasha and shabda were integrated. And this is commonsensical, right? It is not some super science or physics or chemistry, right? Now, why is everything Panchamahabhutik or Panchabhautik? The reason is that there are things that can be seen as well as touched. For example, a tree. You can see a tree and also you can touch it. There are things that can be seen, tasted, and smelled. For example, eatables. You can see them, you can taste them, you can smell them. So hence it was logical to propose that everything is composed of these 5 units, but in different proportions. It was quite logical, right? Again, commonsensical. Hence the saying, everything in this universe is Panchabhautik. But Panchamahabhuta could not explain health and disease. This is where the limitation of Panchamahabhuta theory comes into, play. This is the limitation, right? Panchamahabhutas, they cannot explain health and disease because, even a rock is made up of Panchamahabhuta. Even my body is made up of Panchamahabhuta. So what is the difference between my body and a rock, right? So my body, there is, so many things that are going on in my body, right? And to explain my health and my, you know, uh, probability of getting some diseases or some treatments. So all this needed to be systematized, and they, evolved a theory of Tridosha. Again, some basics of, understanding of commonsensical understanding will be of help for us, right? So these are some very basic observations, right? Imagine a plant kept in the dark in a closed airtight jar. It dies soon, right? It cannot survive without water, without sunlight, without nutrients. It cannot survive. Similarly, too cold a climate normally does not support life. An animal, when suffocated, it dies. One cannot survive without water and food. Again, these are all very commonsensical things, right? Common observations. Warm on touch is a sign of life. A dead body is cold, right? Warmth, right, is a sign of life. So these are some, very common observations, and these observations, they led to a formation of theory that is called Tridosha. Yes, I generated this drawing using artificial intelligence, DALI, right? Anyways, this drawing also was created by using artificial intelligence. Anyways, so name three essentials without which you cannot survive. If I ask you this question, what will be your answer? Name three essentials without which you cannot survive. So possibly, ultimately, almost all of us will come to these three entities. One is air or wind, right? Without breathing, without wind or without air, we cannot breathe. Without breathing, we cannot survive. Second one is sun, because we might be eating animals or plants, right? But ultimately, all animals depend on plants for the energy needs, and all plants, they depend on sun for the energy purposes, right? So ultimate source of energy is sun. So without sun, we cannot survive. And third one is water. We need water to drink and also to cook food, right? So without water also we cannot survive. So possibly these are the three very essential things without which we cannot survive, right? So this was the fundamental based on which Tridosha theory was evolved, right? Soma, Surya and Anila. Visargadana vikshepaihi Soma, Surya, Anila yatha dharayanti jagadeham kapha pitta anilastatha, right? So Soma has got two meanings, moon and water. And this term is used sometimes interchangeably to mean moon as well as water. So air or wind, it is related with atmosphere, breath, and also movement. Sun is associated with light, fire, heat, warmth, energy, nutrition, right? All these are, associated with sun. And water is associated with the hydration, nourishment, coolant. So these are the features of wind, sun, and water. And hence, based on this, Tridosha theory was developed, right? A theory that was developed to systematize and integrate the knowledge on health, disease, and therapeutics. So that is how we can, define Tridosha theory, right? And again, Tridosha and five Mahabhutas or Panchamahabhutas were also integrated. Wind and Akasha dominates Vata, right? Fire dominates Pitta. Water and to a lesser extent Earth dominate Kapha. So again, Panchamahabhutas were also integrated with the Tridosha. Now, this understanding of Tridosha or this concept of Tridosha was then associated with physiology and later on with pathology, then diseases, right? And even therapeutics. Everything was, systematized using the theory of Tridosha. That is why Tridosha theory was essential, right? So it was logical to propose that Vata, just as wind, controlled all activities like movements, right? Pitta, just as sun and fire, generated heat, imparted color, brought about digestion, metabolism. All these functions were ascribed to Pitta. Kapha was considered to be responsible for nourishment and also acted as coolant, just as water. Just as water, Kapha acted as a coolant and also it provided nourishment. Now comes the principle of guna or attribute. So this is another important doctrine. This was also adopted from Nyaya Vaisheshika system. Each dosha has specific attributes. For instance, tatra ruksho laghu shita khara sukshmashchalo nilaha. Right? So for vata, pitta and kapha, there are specific attributes, right, that have been ascribed. Now, similarly, all medicinal plants also have specific attributes. Right? Some spices may be ushna, tikshna. Right? Some other medicinal plants could be laghu or snigdha. All that is possible. Right? Food grains also. Right? Food grains also. They also have specific attributes. Right? And this understanding has some application. Right? Because it is proposed that the attributes of food that are common to a dosha cause an increase in the activity of corresponding dosha. For example, consumption of oily, sweet, heavy food leads to an increase in kapha, and thus it might lead to obesity. Similarly, avyayama, divaswapna, right? They increase some other attributes of kapha, hence they also contribute to obesity. Lack of physical activity, too much of day sleep, right? Consumption of oily, sweet, heavy foods. All this led to increase in kapha, and that is why the person developed obesity. See, this is how the theory of Tridosha was integrated with the food, right? So kapha and vata also share mostly opposite attributes, except for shita. Most of the attributes of kapha and vata are opposite. Hence, anything that is similar in the attributes of vata would lead to a decrease in kapha, right? For example, vyayama, physical exercise, right? Intake of dry, light, rough food, ruksha, laghu, kind of food, right? That leads to a decrease in kapha because it increases vata, and vata and kapha are opposite. Hence, it will act as a treatment of obesity. So in the treatment of obesity, it is wise to use dry, light, rough food substances, physical exercise, right, controlled sleep, and so on. And it makes perfect sense. It is completely scientific. There could be no argument against this. So thus this theory is commonsensical and based on simple observations. And therefore, entire therapeutics are classified into Brahmana and Langana, right? Based on this theory, based on this understanding. But we should remember that this has got some limitations as well. So before discussing about the limitations, we will talk about the utility. This Tridosha theory is definitely of importance. It is of importance. There is no doubt about it. So Tridosha and their associated attributes are used to identify and classify clinical symptoms. For example, itching is due to kapha. Right? Edema is due to kapha. Pain is due to vata. Burning is due to pitta, and so on. Right? So this enables quick clinical decision making. Right? Similarly, population can be classified into different groups based on Tridosha theory. And this may be of some predictive and also preventive value. I mean, this is Prakriti, right? Prakriti, classification of people into different Prakriti groups. And there are several studies which have highlighted the possible association between genome-wide distribution or maybe expression of certain genes, or a new branch is evolving that is called genomics and so on. Of course, all these are still, as of now, they do not give any definitive answer, but yes, they are indicative of some possibilities. Specific medicinal plants are helpful in treating diseases associated with a particular dosha. Again, each medicinal plant has specific doshahara property. For instance, Nirgundi, Vatahara, Ushira, Pittahara, Gugulu, Kaphahara, right? So, enables the physician to choose the right drug, right? So, it is helpful in normal clinical setup to a certain extent, definitely, right? Now, coming to the limitations. The problem with Tridosha theory is that it employs a phenomenon called a gross generalization. Right? This Tridosha logic is grossly insufficient to diagnose complex diseases, unlike obesity or malnourishment. Right? In obesity and malnourishment, this is quite helpful, but all diseases are not that simple. Even obesity cannot be that simple. There could be so many reasons for production of obesity, right? For instance, excessive pitta produces an excess of heat in the body because the production of heat is the function of pitta. But fever can manifest because of hundreds of reasons. For instance, infections, hyperthyroidism, cancers, autoimmune disorders, and so on. And in all such conditions, fever could be just a symptom or a sign, right? And Tridosha theory is insufficient to explain this complexity. Simply by saying that, there is increase in pitta and therefore there is a fever or jvara. This will be gross generalization. This is the example for gross generalization, right? This is the problem with Tridosha theory. Similarly, pathophysiology. There is no description of the role of pancreas in metabolism in Ayurvedic textbooks. And all conditions manifesting with polyuria are included under prameha. Right? Prabhuta, avela, mutrata. That is the definition of prameha. Right? Polyuria. And hence, the pathophysiology of diabetes is incomplete as per Ayurvedic textbooks. And for that matter, no endocrine disease has a correct pathological basis as per Ayurvedic textbooks. Right? Many scholars argue that Ashta Mahagada, Ashtanindita Purusha, right? It is representative of clinical endocrinology or something like that. But again, I would say that this is oversimplification, right? All these manifestations could be due to endocrinal disorders, but they could also be due to some other problems like genetic problems and so on. So Tridosha theory is insufficient to explain these complexities, and we need to accept it, and we need to explain this to our students. That is where this becomes important in the current scenario of education. Right? Now there could be another debate. Tridoshas, are they substances or theoretical entities? Some scholars argued that Tridoshas could be inferred only through their functions and cannot be perceived through sense organs. Right? Hence, they gave Tridosha a theoretical identity. Many scholars, most of the current scholars, right, in Ayurveda, they consider Tridoshas as functional entities or theoretical entities. Right? But classics, they describe different tubular structures along with their colors. Right? Vata Vahasira, Pitta Vahasira, Kapha Vahasira, and so on. So that carried Vata, Pitta, and Kapha in the body. So in the classics, also there are some divergent views. Some scholars opine that yes, Vata, Pitta, Kapha are substances or material entities, and some others they said no, they can be inferred only through Anumana. Hence, there was some conflicting views. There were some conflicting views within the Samhitas. This is the problem with modern scholars that I have. And mostly they regard Vata, Pitta, Kapha as functional entities or theoretical structures. Theoretical constructs, and not as structural entities. Right? But they fail to provide a logical justification based on which they disregard the structural existence of Tridosha. Because classical textbooks, they mention even the Vata Vahasira, Pitta Vahasira, and so on. So, do they disregard it just because that doesn't suit their story? Or is it for the sake of convenience? Why accept something and disregard something else from the same classical textbook? What discretion do you exercise? I am asking these questions, I'm placing these questions before those scholars who deny the existence of structural existence of Tridosha. So on what basis you come to this conclusion? That is something nobody talks about. Simply saying that no, they are theoretical entities doesn't justify the classical textbooks. Now another important deficiency is pathophysiology. Right? So obesity induced osteoarthritis of knee, right, presents with vata symptoms like pain, swelling, or maybe, right. So the treatment should be aimed at reducing weight. The primary treatment should be aimed at reducing weight because it is obesity induced. So reduction of kapha is what is required, right? But Tridosha theory doesn't explain this. So many scholars, they bring in the concepts like avarana. Right? Again, avarana and such other explanations are just ad hoc conjectures. They are just brought in to rescue the theory whenever it fails. Whenever this theory fails, they bring in these sorts of explanations to rescue the theory. Right? Avarana is purely an imaginative explanation. It has got no biological basis. Similarly, another example, anemia of renal origin. This cannot be diagnosed using Ayurvedic logic because the role of kidneys in erythropoiesis was not known, and obviously it was not known. They did not have these tools to identify these functions. Newer diseases like hypertension, infectious diseases, maybe COVID-19 for instance, hyperlipidemia, that cannot be accurately diagnosed based on Ayurvedic logic because these identities are new. Hypertension is diagnosed at such a phase or stage when there are no presenting symptoms, right? So in Ayurveda, if you look for hypertension, you might get some references for complications of hypertension, maybe in Mutraghata because of hypertensive renal disease, or Timira, hypertensive retinopathy, or maybe Pakshaghata, stroke, hypertensive stroke. So in all such diseases, you might get an indication of hypertension, but as we define hypertension today, mild hypertension, moderate all these cannot be identified using Ayurvedic theories or Ayurvedic textbooks. Even hyperlipidemia, for example. So such newer entities cannot be diagnosed accurately using Ayurvedic logic. So we need to understand that Vata Pitta Kapha represent an oversimplified theory, which can lead to errors if employed without applying current scientific knowledge pertaining to physiology and pathology. Hence, a basic knowledge of physiology and pathology becomes very essential, without which, if you apply Tridosha blindly, there are chances that you may commit errors or mistakes. Hence, while the theory could be of some use in clinical diagnosis and in planning treatment, it fails to explain pathophysiology, right? And it may lead to errors. Hence, projecting Tridosha theory as a complete, super sophisticated, scientifically proven theory is problematic, right? In the, while we are enthusiastic about Ayurveda, definitely, right? But this over enthusiasm sometimes leads to trying to defend our theories, which are sometimes not defendable, right? So undefendable should not be defended, right? So it is useful only as a heuristic model. As a heuristic model, yes, Tridosha theory is useful in the clinical scenario. It is definitely useful, but that is not something that is super scientific or super sophisticated or something. Now, contextualizing Tridosha theory in the health sciences. As we know, the Ayurveda literature got documented somewhere between 4th century BC and 2nd century AD, right, in the form of samhitas. and some scholars they take back this timeline to 8th century BC. So whatever it is, this is the timeline when these theories got documented, right? But many theories of Ayurveda might have been in existence before this as a part of oral tradition. That we cannot deny. And it is interesting to note that theories like Tridosha are common to many ancient medical traditions. For instance, in the ancient Greek medicine, they have blood, yellow bile, black bile, and phlegm as 4 humors. And those interested might go through a Wikipedia article on humorism, right? Even in traditional Chinese medicine, a somewhat similar theory existed. Right? You can search on the internet for this article, the concept of wind in traditional Chinese medicine. So these theories were not unique to Ayurveda. They were, common to many different traditional medicine streams. This is very interesting. And if you read about Indo-European languages, Sir William Jones has proposed Indo-European language family. Right? This Indo-European language family is, again, this is a very interesting concept. He has noted similarities among Greek, Latin, Sanskrit, Germanic, and Celtic languages. Those who are interested might like to go through the Wikipedia article on Indo-European languages. See, we know that there are some common words between English and Sanskrit. Brother, bhratra, mother, matra, three, trini, na, no. There are hundreds of such words which are very, very similarly sounding, and they all have the common, semantic connection. And this is very interesting. And continuous exchanges between different cultures and a distant common origin in the form of Proto-Indo-European language are the 2 possibilities. And both could be true, right? There must have been several exchanges. For instance, we have references for, Greek scholars visiting India, maybe Takshashila, and then, the exchanges having been taken place. And even before that, possibly through Persia, right? This exchange was, a common thing to have happened. And so there are 2 possibilities: continuous exchange between different cultures and a distant common origin in the form of Proto-Indo-European language. That is also another possibility. This theory argues that, there was a common language from which all these different members of Indo-European language, right? These languages, they originated. And you might be interested to know that many words are common to these languages, and several words sound very similar even from within Ayurvedic Samhitas. Ignis is Greek word, which is, in Ayurveda it is Agni. Pneuma and Prana, which are similar. Phlegm, Shleshma, they sound very similar. Vayu, Aeolus. So there is something very important concept, right? Like association and causation. So association and causation are confusing, could be confusing sometimes. And many times, authors or investigators or scientists can mistake association for causation. So for instance, the picture that I am showing you, right? I have downloaded from, somewhere from the internet. This is a typical example to show that how can one misunderstand association for causation. Imagine a situation: a fit person, while peacefully reading a book, suddenly develops involuntary movements all over the body and develops forgetfulness. An attack of seizure, right? Or epileptic attack, for instance. A physically healthy individual starts seeing things that do not exist, or starts hearing sounds that do not exist, hallucinations. Right? See, these are certain things that can happen all of a sudden. And imagine you are in, 4th century BC or somewhere. Right? And how would Charak or Sushruta have interpreted this? Because the existing understanding of biology, it was insufficient to explain the pathology behind such instances. So they could have asked the questions like, is some unseen supernatural force leading to the manifestation of these symptoms? It was logical for them to have these questions. Are gods or demons are behind this? Like Bhuta, Pishacha, and so on, right? Can we recommend sacrifices or wearing the precious stones or offerings like Havana, right? Mantra, money, right? All these could they be of help as a treatment? So these questions could have been common for those scholars, because the existing knowledge was insufficient to explain these manifestations. So some of these illnesses could be self-limiting, others could be episodic and brief, but there are chances that one could infer causation. For example, sacrifice cured epilepsy, right? You gave some sacrifice and then the person got back to normalcy. Right? So Ayurveda theorists might have mistaken association for causation. And this is the reason why it is difficult to build a continuous coherent story out of the existing Ayurvedic textbooks. The rational scientific descriptions are often mixed between faith-based and speculative arguments. And this is a problem that we need to address. It's our duty to address this. We need to separate out what is rational and scientific description and what is faith-based and speculative argument. This is the duty of present generation, is what I'm trying to convey. So there was a study, right, similar one, not exactly this one, but yes, one observes that people aged 95 years and above drink plenty of coffee, for instance, and drinking coffee is associated with longevity. This is one of the inferences. Another inference could be drinking coffee leads to longevity, right? When you derive a conclusion that drinking more coffee leads to longevity, you are mistaking association for causation. Because when you have surveyed a aged population, and when you get to know that yes, most of them they drink coffee, it could be just an association, right? It could be an indication of affordability or good socioeconomic status, giving easy access to healthcare. We don't know. So instead of getting to the actual cause, we might get misled because of something else, just because there is some association. So this is where we need to be careful. Many modern scholars also, many modern scholars, many scientists, they sometimes mistake association for causation. And if you look at the means of deriving knowledge as per Ayurvedic textbooks, it was always pratyaksha, anumana, aptopadesha, and yukti, right? Pratyaksha means direct observation, anumana, inference, aptopadesha, authoritative knowledge, and yukti, inference based on multiple observations of associations. So we need to understand that none of these methods took controlled experimentation as a tool to derive knowledge. So controlled experimentation alone can confirm cause-effect relationship. But wasn't there any kind of experimentation in Ayurveda? It was there. For instance, upashaya, anupashaya, right? What aggravates the symptoms? What diminishes the symptoms? So this kind of testing was there. But again, they were of primitive nature. There was no control, right? In the absence of control, you again tend to mistake association for causation, right? or simply that becomes an anecdotal evidence, right? So they did not have controls. Hence, possibly, right, trial and error method was the most used experimental method in Ayurvedic textbooks. However, the history of human experimentation is very dark and inhuman. This also we need to understand, right? Simply because they did not have controlled experimentation, we should not brush aside the entire observations that have been documented in Ayurvedic textbooks. The human experimentation is very new, right? And it has got a very dark and inhuman history. So those interested can go through the Nazi human experimentation article on Wikipedia. Right? The Nuremberg Code and other things, all that came up only after such inhuman, treatment was given to humans. So several, people were thrown into water of different temperatures just to see for what duration they survive. So this was so inhuman. So this kind of experimentation was not there in Ayurveda for quite obvious reasons, because Ayurveda has always placed importance on empathy. So human empathy, right? Atha bhuta dayam prati. So that daya is the major aspect that led to the development of Ayurvedic knowledge, which is missing in Ayurveda, these kinds of human experimentation. So we need to understand this as well. So these kinds of experimentations were not conducted by Charak or Sushrita, not because they could not do it, but their ethical values, they did not allow them to do such experiments. This is what we need to remember. Now, when do we go wrong? Instead of critically examining the available literature and subjecting it to the evaluation, arguing that whatever is written in ancient textbooks is true and unquestionable, this sort of an assumption makes Ayurveda a pseudoscience. So there is a pseudoscience and science debate going on, especially during last few years. Right? Ayurveda is not a pseudoscience inherently, but we have made it a pseudoscience. Right? All modern discoveries are already documented in Ayurveda is another sort of viewpoint that makes Ayurveda a pseudoscience. Right? For example, saying that Pishacha, Rakshasa, etc., right, are nothing but the different bacteria and viruses. So if you make such an assertion, definitely you are making Ayurveda a pseudoscience. Right? So these are some of the scopes and limitations of Ayurveda. So descriptions recorded based on observations are important. In Ayurvedic classics, all those descriptions that are recorded based on the observations are of immense importance. Maybe symptoms or signs and symptoms of disease or clinical manifestation, maybe treatment plan, medicinal plants, preventive aspects or dietetics. All these could be of high value, right? But at the same time, Ayurveda textbooks do not contain good anatomy, physiology, and pathology. So the physiological role of many organs such as kidneys, pancreas, ovaries were not known to ancient scholars for obvious reasons. I'm not ridiculing them. These are the facts. We need to accept these as facts. Many physiology descriptions too are incorrect or incomplete. For instance, formation of blood or formation of semen, formation of urine, right? All these are incorrect or incomplete. And imaginative theories such as dhatu parinama are of minimal value. Right? Similarly, samprapti of most of the diseases is either imaginative or quasi-observational. For instance, kapha stops the movement of vata, or vata takes pitta to different parts, etc. See, all these are imaginative explanations, right? But yes, some part of samprapti could be observational. So where is the disease manifesting? The sthana samshaya or dhatus involved, all that could be observational, right? Hence, it could be quasi-observational, right? But sometimes it is purely imaginative. For instance, avarana, right? Now, I recently got to read an article, Ayurveda and Endocrinology, Common Ground, Common Goals. So this was authored by endocrinologists, not by Ayurvedic scholars. And we need to be very, very careful while reading such kind of articles, right? Some scientists, they show interest in Ayurveda because they find parallels, and they find these parallels very interesting. For instance, in this article, they write like ojas, tejas, prana, and hormones, right? Tejas and pheromones. So it looks interesting, right? But we should be very, very careful while reading such articles, right? Comparable or similar theories are simply commonsensical. They should not be confused for advanced theories. Exotic or interesting doesn't mean scientifically advanced, right? So such comparisons often render sophisticated details into vague concepts. This is something that we must remember. Sometimes we over enthusiastically we do, comparisons and uh, correlations. We say that yes, motility of sperms is controlled by vata, or all enzymatic activity is controlled by pitta, all hormones are representative of dhatagnis. So such, you know statements we often make. I too have made it in my past writings. I too have done this, but now I have realized that such assertions, you know make Ayurveda pseudoscience. First thing. Second thing, they do not contribute anything meaningful. They do not contribute anything that is meaningful, right? All this exercise is futile. So such comparisons often render sophisticated details such as molecular mechanisms. For example, enzymatic activity is a molecular, level of mechanism. When you know the molecular structure of a protein, of enzyme or something like that, right? When you convert it into pitta or agni, what you are doing? You are converting a sophisticated detail into a vague concept. We need to understand this. This is something very interesting, and we have to be very, very careful. Otherwise, we are harming our Ayurvedic system by doing these kinds of exercises. So this is the last part of my talk. The current education system is faulty because it doesn't encourage questioning and promotes blind faith in authority. Teaching exercise is intended at reinforcing the belief that our ancient textbooks contain only truth and nothing else. So this is not how a teaching should take place. Good teaching should always, examine and critically evaluate the contents that are being taught. Instead of justifying everything, we need to ask critically, you know, challenging questions, right? And we need an unbiased, but at the same time considered approach. Of course, it is ours. Ayurvedic science is ours, right? We are the custodians of this science, and we need to have a considered approach, right? But at the same time, we need unbiased approach while approaching samhitas. The need of the hour is to develop a method to identify observations, practices, theories, imaginations, and speculations clearly. Because our textbooks, they are a mixture of all this. We need to identify each of these and separate them out, identify them, and then separate useful observations and practices from hypothetical, speculative, theoretical explanations or descriptions. Then subject what is useful to an evidence-based appraisal so that the best becomes available for use. But at the same time, we need to exercise caution while labeling something as unscientific. Add advanced physiology, anatomy, biochemistry in the curricula, of course, pathology also. Without this, a biological basis of a disease cannot be understood. So, biological basis of health and disease should form the foundation, not the theoretical foundation. So, I would like to share some of the interesting results that we recently got out of our a study that we conducted. It is still unpublished, but yes, I can share with you some basic conclusions. So we asked around 150 physicians to describe what they would prescribe in a given clinical case or clinical case scenario, and then we asked them to explain the physiological basis of this their prescriptions, because it is often argued that Ayurvedic prescriptions are driven by, you know, uh, maybe dosham, dushyam, balam, kalam, manalam, prakritim, vayaha, and so on. So it is always individualized. This is what we argue. Now we wanted to see how much of this is true in the real world scenario. So we asked them to explain us what physiological explanations, right, drive these prescriptions. We wanted to know the logical basis. And we observed that the interventions prescribed by the physicians vary widely in a single patient scenario. That is fine, right? But this goes to the extent of one physician prescribing certain intervention and the other saying that the same intervention is contraindicated. This is problematic. Similarly, Ayurveda-based pathophysiological explanations to justify their interventions vary widely for a single patient. For instance, even regarding the identification of primary dosha or subtype of dosha, there is often no consensus among the physicians. And all these physicians have at least 5 years of clinical expertise. So physicians often use biomedicine-based diagnosis as well as treatment plan, but mostly do not acknowledge the same. All these are our findings. And physicians mostly neglect the factors like prakriti, desha, kala, akoshtha, sara, etc. while prescribing the treatment. And this contradicts the usual argument that we always go for individualization in the Ayurvedic practice. So what we argue and what we say is something different from what we actually do. And this is the problem. We need to face this head on. Yes, Ayurveda is not a pseudoscience inherently, as I told you earlier. Right? Ayurveda is not a pseudoscience inherently. It is as much science as is Ptolemy's theory of universe. Right? He proposed the geocentric theory of universe. And we do not call geocentric theory as pseudoscience. It was pre-scientific at the maximum. So geocentric theory was discarded as soon as new evidence came up. As soon as heliocentric theory came up, this theory was discarded, and that is how science grows. So similarly, many Ayurveda theories are pre-scientific. Humoral theory, for instance, is insufficient in understanding health and disease. This theory existed even in other ancient civilizations. And this is not pseudoscience. Irrespective of all its limitations, it is not pseudoscience as many people make it out to be. At the maximum, it could be pre-science or proto-science. When the practitioners and teachers of Ayurveda start defending these theories and start projecting them as though they are super sophisticated and sometimes yet to be proven by modern science theories, they make Ayurveda a pseudoscience. So we have to take the blame of having made Ayurveda a pseudoscience. And that is why I had to write an article on Confessions of Ayurveda Practitioner, Professor. Because I too had contributed to this phenomenon of making Ayurveda a pseudoscience. This is where we go wrong, and we need to accept this. So how can we do course correction? How much of irrelevant and impractical content is taught in Ayurveda curricula is a matter of serious concern and needs serious deliberation. The assumption that Ayurveda is unquestionable makes Ayurveda non-falsifiable and hence a non-science. I have dealt in details about this falsifiability, verifiability, and so on in my Confessions article. Those who are interested can go through my article, right, titled Confessions of an Ayurveda Professor, right, where I have discussed all this in detail. So such a deliberation does not happen when only Ayurveda experts sit. sit together for carrying out curricular reforms. But I hope it may happen. It may, right? When there is involvement of experts from multiple disciplines. Uh, this is something very interesting. Did theories lose importance as Ayurveda evolved? Many have not, many scholars have not, touched upon this topic. Actually, it is often argued that evolution of textbooks in Ayurveda stopped long ago, and possibly Vagbhata was the last one to come up with his own complete treatise. Some scholars, they argue that okay, maybe Shayamgirha Samhita was the last one. Right? But to me, this argument looks unfounded. Many books were authored by different Vaidyas even after Vagbhata wrote his Ashtanga Hridaya or Ashtanga Samhita. For example, I will quote 2 or 3 textbooks: Yoga Ratnakara, Chakradatta, Bhaishija Ratnavali. Right? These were certain important textbooks that were written. And they mostly describe different formulations and therapies for different diseases. And clinical presentation of different diseases also is documented. Emphasis was also placed on pharmacy. And many Vaidyas, even today, they depend on these textbooks for their normal day-to-day clinical practice. So, in these textbooks, the importance given to theories is minimal. And we need to look at this process as a part of evolution. Slowly, the theories and speculative descriptions were sidelined and discarded, and only direct observations received more and more attention and were retained. Right? Many of our, reputed Vaidyas who wrote these textbooks, they had identified this, that observations were more important and theories were not that important, and they had already started the process of discarding those speculative arguments and theories. But somehow the current education system again started treating those theories as something that is very important. And actually that is how science evolves or advances, for that matter. Right? What is not so useful is discarded, and that is how science grows. And if we want Ayurveda to grow, we need to adopt this tradition. It is our tradition to discard what is not useful. But somehow this point has missed. No scholar has spoken or written about this aspect, and has considered this as a part of evolution of Ayurveda. Yes, this is the last slide. I thank Dr. G.L. Krishna of Bangalore. He has given some feedback on various topics expressed in this talk, and also he happened to be the one who made me introspect and revise my ideas on the subject. He has written many articles on Tridosha and many other approaches of Ayurveda, and I strongly recommend the viewers to go through his essays that are published and that are there on the public domain. So yes, these are the important references that I have used while preparing these slides. And yes, this is the last slide. Richard Feynman once wrote or said that we are trying to prove ourselves wrong as quickly as possible, because only in that way we can find progress. And I think this should be the mantra of all Ayurvedic scholars and teachers. And we should try to prove ourselves wrong as quickly as possible, so that we can accelerate the progress in the field of Ayurveda. And yes, with this, I would like to conclude my talk, and I thank the organizers for having given me this opportunity to speak before you. And yes, thank you.